Andrei Soran, Chairman, ConnectorNet. It's great to see you again. I wanted to
Thank
have you on the show because you spent a lifetime creating transformational change in healthcare, taking companies, systems, and institutions through some of its most challenging times. And in fact, you just shared that you're launching a new company this week called Exact Leaders, which really supports turnaround and restructuring of healthcare companies that really need such services. So I'm glad you could join me, Andrei, at this moment, and please share with our listeners of CEOs and founders such as yourself your story, how you got from where you were to where you are today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me online today. I'm a clinician by trade and by heart. At heart, I'm a physical therapist. I started my career providing one-on-one healthcare to people, and at some point in time, I felt the need to impact at larger magnitude, more than one-on-one. So that's how I started my managerial track, and I started to manage small hospitals initially, then large hospitals in Massachusetts. After that, I was the president of Detroit Medical Center, which is a large academic center, 8 hospitals, 12,000 employees, $2.5
Wow.
billion in revenues. Um, and then I joined a private equity company. We bought a healthcare system in California, a struggling healthcare system, which was Daughters of Charity with name Verity. We were successful in turning around that system, and in the tradition of private equity, we found a buyer and sold the company. After that, I had the privilege of doing another turnaround and restructuring with Trident, which is probably the largest platform for lab and imaging services to post-acute care. And following the successful and following the successful restructuring of that company, I joined Pipeline, which is a healthcare system made of 7 hospitals in Chicago, Dallas, and California. The system was struggling, and we needed to do a sale of a couple of the hospitals and then restructuring for operational and financial reasons the rest of the hospitals, and we emerged successfully. Following that, I started to do more of activities that I've done before, advising and sitting on several boards of public and private companies.
Yes.
And at some point in time, I was approached by many of my colleagues who were inquiring about the connections that we all have as networkers in healthcare. And everybody was explaining and expressing the frustration with the inability to connect to the right people, to establish partnerships or sales or development.
Ah, yes.
And that's how the ConnectorNet has started as a need for lead generation by healthcare executives to promising companies that otherwise don't have the access. So not everybody is a General Electric, not everybody is a Philips, but a lot of people have very innovative products, services, ideas,
Yes.
and we're establishing a large network of executives that can connect between promising companies and healthcare executives that can introduce them to potential clients. The company is growing very fast. There is obviously a lot of interest. It is
Yeah.
also combined with the current economic situation, which makes cold calls essentially impossible. So you
Yes.
need to know somebody to be able to accomplish some of your goals. Um, I also joined a venture capital fund because of my experience with more on the operational side. I'm not
Yes.
one who discovers the next new innovation, but at least I know what works or doesn't in the
Mm-hmm.
context of healthcare. So I'm helping Sanara Capital, which is a venture capital fund, deploying commercially in the United States those
Okay.
companies. Last but not least, we started the exact leaders, and we'll talk a little bit more about this because it's relevant to the activities that I'm usually engaged in.
Yeah. So it's really fascinating. I mean, we were speaking just before we started to record here. I said you've spent your life, you know, really helping companies, but you started by helping people one to one. Then, as I recall, if I'm getting this right, you were in a hospital. Then you were working in a hospital that had 7 hospitals, which is a massive hospital system, and then you got involved on both the buy side and the sell side, working within private equity because you can see 360. In you're like, speaking of your medical what's the word, you can do like a sonogram on these problems. You've seen the inside and the outside of them and what makes them tick and where the flaws are. And so now you are kind of reaching in some ways, certainly not the last but an ultimate point where you are serving such a role to help awesome talent with great capabilities connect with companies with great potential where there is great need. So that I sort of see, looking from the outside in, that trajectory, and that to me, you're serving now almost, going from one to one to hospitals to multiple healthcare systems. You're now going to the entire healthcare ecosystem because you can bring talent, correct me if I'm wrong, to that entire ecosystem.
Yes, let's take a break because they're making too much noise. I
Okay,
really have to.
sure, no problem.
I have a full house. People are still here from the Ilana. You screaming. I can't do it, okay?
So where we left off is I was just noting you sort of reached this point where you're now have the potential to impact the entire healthcare ecosystem by bringing much needed talent to where there is great need in companies.
So, a very interesting observation and obviously very relevant. Throughout my career, I went from non-profits to for-profits. I was on the side of the management, then I was on the side of the investment, and first and foremost on the clinical side.
Yes.
So at some point in time, like you describe, you get a 360 perspective,
Hmm.
and slowly, through many errors, you start finding out what actually works.
Yeah.
And I've been fortunate to have several successes with private equity and
Yes.
in other circumstances,
Yes.
and I'm trying to share with others the lessons that I learned. Okay, and sometimes it's not necessarily what you do; it's a lot of times what you shouldn't do,
Yes.
and that is something that it's a recipe for some level of success. I
Yes.
can give you an example from
Please, that would be great. I'd love to hear all the lessons, but whatever you're comfortable sharing.
so in one of the companies that I had the privilege of leading, we had a very large footprint in almost every state in the country.
Hmm.
And while there were states where we were marginally profitable, the logistics and what we call, at least in my companies, the calories needed to manage that
Ah, great
was
expression.
distracting from the efforts that we could have done in other places. So we designed a strategy based on previous experience that we all had that we call it shrink to grow. And
Ah,
and essentially what we did, we stopped operations in several
yeah,
states
yes.
and focused in areas where we can gain market share in a more meaningful way. And while it was difficult for the company because those
Oh,
were
I bet.
essentially not losing propositions but
Hmm.
comparable,
Right.
we were doing better by spending the time, capital, energy in another place. Um, I find that if you have not gone through this, or you don't have experience, or somebody who can
Yeah.
share with you that kind of insight, a lot of people have some difficulties taking steps
Oh,
of
I'm
that
sure.
magnitude.
I'm sure. In fact, it can sound like heresy, like to shrink a company to grow. Like, what does that mean? You know, it's very hard when it's all about growth, growth, growth to really make those strategic trade-offs. So
Yeah.
you're dealing with making those strategic trade-offs, but you have to get a few folks to come along for the ride with you. And that's change. That's big change, challenge.
That is one example. Another example in one of my latest engagements, we actually decided to sell part of the portfolio in order to allow the resources to be spent on the rest of what's left
Yeah.
inside. Um,
Yeah.
those are decisions that for every CEO there are
Right.
lonely decisions that you have to make, and you have to bear
Yeah.
the responsibilities. I
Yes.
can't tell you that that's 100% success guaranteed, but especially in companies that need turnarounds or
Yes.
restructuring, you
Yeah.
have to take steps of that magnitude.
Yeah, and you know it's interesting because in 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 work that I've seen, even in other industries, there are companies that are spending calories. I love that expression. I'm going to use it with your permission, if that's okay,
Sure.
on unprofitable products and services, while those where they could be making money are starved for resources, but nobody's looking at a level of detail. And it's all about, well, how can we get this service more profitable, which is well and good, but at what cost? So I think this has to be a very challenging and like you say, one of those major 2, 3 very strategic decisions a CEO has to make and own for a company.
I'll give you another example that many CEOs in healthcare, especially, not exclusively the ones that run hospitals, have to make at some point in time. Providing maternity services is crucial for communities that we serve.
Yes.
However, the the volume of such a service is critical because, at least in general, if you do less than 600 deliveries a year in a hospital, it is not self-sustainable.
Oh, interesting.
Um, in many hospitals or many locales, the service is very needed, but the volume is not there. And a lot of times, boards and CEOs have to have a dialogue, honest dialogue,
Hmm.
not only amongst themselves, but with
Yes.
the communities that they serve,
Yes.
to figure out if that service remains
Wow.
viable.
Yes. Yeah.
Those are very significant decisions that you have to make, not only in restructuring, you have to make this for sustainability and financial viability. And those
Yes.
require experience, those
Yes.
require insight, and
Yes.
sometimes a helping hand from outside.
Right. Right. And perhaps that's where, some of these ideas for partnerships, and collaborations can come into the picture to continue to serve the community. But that's again a whole different layer of this. So it strikes me as I listen to you that you have, and maybe you don't want me reminding you of this, but that you have chosen a field where half the population thinks it's like, why should they make money, why, or healthcare is making too much money, the healthcare business is, and they're impacting families and individuals, high cost, and at the same time these are businesses that have to be managed, have to be successfully managed. There are profit considerations. So the forces that are always at play in any for-profit company are greatly amplified here, where it becomes a matter of life and death, or life, what my life is like, in making these kinds of trade-offs and decisions.
Is healthcare a right? Well, it's a debate, and as a clinician, first and foremost, I would say everybody should have access to healthcare,
Yes,
and that
yes,
is something that should be embedded in the fabric.
yes.
I would also tell you that I have a significant amount of international experience in other markets, and there are contradicting facts. On one side, we're spending 17 to 20% of GDP in healthcare, which is double, triple than most other countries.
Wow.
Um, on the other side, I would tell you that a lot of people throughout the world, if they get really sick, they'd rather be in United States.
Yes, yes.
So you have this contradiction, or those forces of saying, yeah, we don't reach everybody here. So there is a lot of work to be done in the United States to make access right. Um, the level of medicine is very high. On other states, you have everybody in other countries, you have the healthcare covered. But if you look at the at Great Britain healthcare system right now, which is in stress and crisis, and I'm getting phone calls from there about how can this be helped, and it's a lot
Yeah,
about politics and resources. They don't
yeah.
have the resources, they don't have the clinicians, the staff, the technology, and you wait 8 to 10 months for a procedure.
Yes,
So there is a balancing act. There are
yes.
some countries that have done it well. I don't think you can really provide high level of healthcare on the cheap. I think that
Yeah.
that that it costs. Now there are a lot of things that we can do better here, and I would say, as unpopular as it may seem, for profits do have a tendency of controlling cost. Okay, so I'm not gonna address the profits, because, as famously the nuns used to say, no margin and no mission. You can't fulfill your duty to the communities that you serve if you don't have
Yes,
enough capital to
yes,
spend and keep the businesses viable. But
yes,
there is a lot to be gained in a non-profit area from the experiences that the for-profits have had.
yes,
There are a lot of practices that private equity brings to the table that are valuable, some that are not. So it's a mixture of things, and I think that if you put together a management team that's strong enough, if you complement it in areas, because you can't be perfect in all the things.
yes,
In some areas, you need some complements and some skill. You can make it happen. I'm actually happy to give the example of your company. To be able to secure and maintain marketing and sales activities at the very high level,
yes,
it's probably not feasible for all companies.
yeah,
If you can complement this with expertise from outside, you get what you're paying for. So
very
you can
true.
actually, at the end of the day, be more economical by accessing resources that otherwise you
Yes.
wouldn't come across, because you wouldn't be able to afford.
Great, great. And thank you for that, Andre. And that sort of leads us to your new startup, that you are launching this week. Talk a little bit more about that, because I would imagine that there are many that this will pique their interest where there is great need.
Yes. Like in, 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 like in gain expertise and gain expertise and get to a certain level where it's almost a mismatch between your qualification and experience and what's available in the market. It is not easy, but there are overqualified people out in the market. I've
Yes.
been fortunate enough to work with very, very talented people. And I can tell you that right now, in the hospital industry, for example, people that have experience in non-profits, for-profits, restructuring, turnarounds, working with private equity, there are very few of them. Um, and it just happens that a lot of them have had the opportunity to work together with me. And I call it opportunity not because it's it's something that's very important for people, but the circumstances that we've been in
Yes.
are unique,
Yes.
unfortunately, more and more common.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those people got together and decided that we can help at scale if we
Yeah.
get together with our skills and offer our services to the market in more of a niche format. And this niche format is this transition.
Mm-hmm.
Companies that are getting to a level that they're in distress, but before they destroy everything internally,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of good that can be done.
Mm-hmm.
During restructuring, uh, most of the people don't have experience with anything from vendor management to
Mm-hmm.
13-week cash flow analysis. You know,
Mm-hmm.
as CEO in healthcare, you work with a P&L. Your lenders and your bank works with cash. There is a distance there, and a lot of people get caught by surprise when they realize that on paper maybe they're doing fine, and yet they're running out of resources. So a group of us, it's not a small group, 10 to 20 people, have decided that we would be able to help healthcare, not only hospitals, but other healthcare organizations
Okay.
in this transition that they have. And we
Yes.
can do this in a more economic fashion than some of the big consulting companies, which
Yeah.
obviously they have a lot of talent. What we bring is operational talent, scars,
Mm-hmm.
and failures and experiences that not many people have. And I think that shortens the process and
Yeah.
the path for success for those
Well, you
organizations.
can save them from some things that they might just be walking right into
Yes,
unknowingly. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And we've seen that. I'll give you an example that is
Please.
very, very common in the hospital industries. We as CEO deal very little with lenders, and yet every one of us is placing bonds, have lines of credit, and it all stops at the CFO level most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
can tell you, once distress is taking hold, those are your partners. You have to know how to work with them, and
Yes.
you have to help them help you. And
Yes.
transparency and collaboration with the lenders becomes
Mm-hmm.
crucial in
Mm-hmm.
turnarounds and
Mm-hmm.
restructuring. We can help companies with that.
Yeah, and you probably bring in some good relationships as well. It does seem like when you hit the point of trouble, that's a tougher time to build the kind of relationship that you might want to have with the bank.
That's a little late.
Yeah,
At that point in time, you're at
yeah,
odds, and everybody
yeah,
is, running for the exits.
yeah, yeah. So as you look ahead, and we'll have information because I know people are going to want to know how to reach Andre and this team. So we'll make sure that we have that information associated with this episode of Success Beneath the Surface. And I don't know if you want to share on this at this moment the best way to reach you, or we can just put it in the information afterwards.
We both ConnectNet and Exact leaders have websites with contact
Okay,
information, and we'll
great.
be happy to chat with people. Sometimes even a informal dialogue helps people frame what they
Yeah,
want to do, what they need. We will
yes,
also start providing insights the same way your company is putting out information, which I think is very
Yes.
valuable. We will
Yes.
also put our thoughts out in forms of podcasts or some
Great.
white papers.
Great. And so I know I said it earlier, but if you had set out at the beginning of your career with a white piece of paper or your desktop and crafted your career, like just crafted it along the way and said, here's where I want to be right when the healthcare industry is at this point in time, it seems to me that you couldn't have handcrafted it better to be where you are, to have all the experiences you've had on all sides of the balance sheet, so to speak, and the industry, and now be ready with a team who have gone through perhaps many of these experiences with you that can now turn and for fees, far better than giant consulting firms, but skills I'm sure equal, if not better, to really serve them. So when you started out as a clinician, did you look ahead and say, okay, this is how I'm going to play it to be right at this point?
Uh, I don't know if it would be a surprise, probably to the listeners or viewers, but no, I didn't draft that
Yeah,
path. I
yeah,
think that one thing led to another. I
yeah,
think that me and my colleagues have the tools to help. I do have regrets. My regret is the healthcare industry is in crisis,
yeah.
and that's a regret. The fact that
Yes,
me and others have the skills to help,
yes,
it's a benefit that I wasn't looking forward to. However,
yeah,
however, at the end of the day, we talk about a couple of things that are very, very important. First, our patients' safety and health. And I think that everybody should start from there.
yes,
Uh, the second thing is our employees and the fact that those turnarounds and restructuring impact a lot of people. And
hmm,
if you do it smartly, everybody's doing layoffs. There are different ways to do layoffs. There are
yes,
ways that hurt less and they're
yes,
more beneficial to the organization.
hmm,
Then we do have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors or stakeholders. It
hmm,
is normal and it doesn't matter if you're on a for profit or non profit. Somebody pays those bills. So
yes,
we have to make this work for them. So for all those reasons, I'm happy that I'm involved in an industry that actually changes lives,
yes,
saves lives, and contributes to the society to a very large extent. So I think I'm fortunate that I'm
yeah,
in healthcare. I'm
yes.
fortunate that I had all those experiences and I can share with others. I would just wish that our industry would be in a better place today.
Well, you have met the mission, and you're on a very important mission, you and your team. And so, thank you for sharing that mission and sharing all your accomplishments and how you're going to be using it in the future with us here today. I really appreciate that, Andrei.
Thank you very much, and thank you for doing the work that you're doing, because I think that you're providing insight to many of us who need this kind of insight. So thank you very much.
Great. And to my listeners, if you liked what you heard today, please subscribe and review in your favorite podcast apps, and subscribe to the Chief Outsiders YouTube channel. And tune in next week.